Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. Crashes at railroad crossings in Durham keep happening. In the latest, a car was hit by a train Monday. The driver survived with minor injuries. But the outcome has been deadly in other cases. WRAL Durham reporter Monica Casey looked into what can be done. Monica, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So how many of these crashes have happened in the last 18 months or so? I know you looked into this. And where do they happen?
So we have covered 7 incidents in about the last 14 months or so. So it goes back to last March, and they're kind of all over the place. It is clear that some railroad crossings are significantly more problematic than others, but we're seeing these everywhere. Going back to last March over in the area of Peabody and Driver Streets, we had a fatal situation. This was one where a car was on the tracks when the train came through. Just a couple days after that, we had a pedestrian killed by a train up a little bit further north in Durham off Hillsborough Road. We had another pedestrian killed in August. And then in September of last year, a train hit a car that was sitting on the tracks in that same Fayetteville, Pettigrew Street area, but luckily no one was in the car in that case. So that one turned out okay. Looking at this year, we had a pedestrian hit by a train in January on Main Street near Hillendale Road. So again, that's a little bit more on the northern edge of town. And then in March, we had a freight train and a car collide over on North Elizabeth Street near East Main Street. So that is it's near downtown, a touch east of downtown. And then most recently on Monday, we had another situation of a train hitting a car, that person with minor injuries, and that was over on Grant Street and Pettigrew Street. So obviously, since the railroad tracks kind of crisscross Durham, we're seeing this a lot of places, but some of these intersections have more issues than others do.
Okay. And is this part of a larger trend? Because as you say, there are so many railroad crossings in the downtown Durham area, or is this an anomaly?
It is part of a larger trend in some of the areas. I actually learned in the course of reporting this story a little bit about the history of Durham, and that it actually kind of started as a depot between Raleigh and Hillsborough, and it really grew out of the downtown train station. So railroad is a huge part of Durham's history, but there are 3 railroad crossings over in East Durham that are particularly problematic and have been issues for years. Those 3 stops are at Plum Street, Driver Street, and one of them is on Ellis Road. There are a couple stops on Ellis Road, but in this case, these 3 stops, there have been 19 crashes in a 25-year span, including 3 deadly ones. So those stops in particular have issues. I spoke with business owners in the area of the Driver Street intersection. It's a lovely little spot where you have a local brewery, a bookstore, a barber shop, a little up-and-coming area right there, and it's getting busier, but there are a ton of different tracks in that spot. You have some freight trains that are parked there and that kind of thing. And those business owners tell me they have people come in who are just confused about how to deal with those railroad tracks. It's not just a single track you drive over. You have tracks coming from different directions. You might be making a left turn and then find yourself on a railroad track. So there's a lot going on in that spot.
And what have local leaders said about as how prevalent these crashes are and sort of those logistics of some of these intersections?
It's a big concern for local leaders here in Durham, and it has been for years. I mean, that stat that I just mentioned, it goes back 25 years. But the thing with the railroads is it's not just city, it's not just county, it's not even just the state. I mean, these train tracks are private property, and so there are all these moving parts in terms of these crashes and what to do about them. Unfortunately, with trains running through Durham frequently, we see a lot of people trying to beat the train. The arms start to come down, and I see people try to scoot through that intersection really quickly, and that's really dangerous, as evidenced with the number of crashes we've seen. It's also because we have this train that runs runs right through downtown Durham. And of course, we know Durham has grown a ton over the last 5, 10, 15 years. We have more pedestrians walking around, even trying to cross the train tracks themselves to get to different places. So it's definitely a major issue that a lot of people are watching here in Durham.
Let's take a quick break right there, and when we come back, we'll talk about possible solutions. Monica, before the break, you were explaining to us, these recent crashes between cars and trains at intersections and the history of Durham, how the layout of the city creates this situation in many cases. What could be done to actually stop these crashes from happening, given how much the city is growing?
Well, one of the big issues with this is that we are seeing train crossings that are at grade. So it basically means that the train is on this exact same level as the road. And so the cars and the train have to share the road. And that is kind of the crux of the entire issue with these trains. And so Durham right now is actually studying those 3 intersections over in East Durham to see about a solution for them. They have federal funding for the study, but the money is just to study it. And of course, to actually maybe build a tunnel or build a bridge, that's going to be a whole nother pot of money. And we have no idea how much that might be. But the issue really stems from the trains and the cars and pedestrians being right there on the same level. You'll see in some places in downtown Durham, I believe there might be a train track that actually goes over the Durham freeway, and it's on top of the road. So there's no chance for interaction between trains and cars. And I think that is one of the things leaders are hoping that they can change here with this. When it comes to intersections and railroad crossings that are within the threshold to be changed, NCDOT has a measurement called the exposure index, and that is a threshold for how many trains per day multiplied by the number of vehicles per day at that crossing. And that number has to be over 30,000 to be considered to make a change to that crossing. In the case of these 3 crossings over in East Durham, at Plum Street, the exposure index is 41,000. At Driver Street, it's over 195,000. And then on Ellis Road, it's over 204,000. So they are well within that threshold, over that threshold of 30,000. And NCDOT also maps out the future crossings and what we might see. And with the growth of this area, those numbers are only going up.
Yeah, that's really impressive when you hear the difference in those figures. How long would it take to actually close these railroad crossings, or, as you say, kind of make it where they're not meeting at grade?
It would probably be a long time. We don't know exactly yet. The study that Durham has funding for, they actually just put out a request for people to bid to do the study. So even though they have funding for the study, we haven't even started studying it yet. So it's going to be a while before anything is changed or possibly closed. And on top of finding someone to do a study, if you do need to do construction and it's being done with this public money, you have to put out a request for qualifications in order to get people to bid on the project. So there are so many moving parts. And again, you'd have the state involved, the railroad likely involved. So it would be a while before we see any changes. So it's really important that people are careful at these crossings.
Right. And you kind of touched on this earlier, but it bears repeating because it is so important. What should people do if they're going to be driving around any of these intersections soon?
They definitely are going to want to pay attention to what the signage is telling them. We have flashing lights with railroads, but you're also looking at the stoplight. And even if the stoplight incorrectly is green, double check, look both ways, just like you would even if you're stepping into a crosswalk and you know you have the right of way. make sure no one's coming. Make sure there's no train coming, because you just never know. And unfortunately, we've reported on a lot of power outages, for example, and a light could be out and you may not realize it. So it's just important, especially in that driver street area where we have so many trains and tracks coming and going, to take a look at the entire picture before you go blowing through that intersection on your way to work or on your way home.
Okay. Thank you so much, Monica. We appreciate your reporting on this. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.